India is not alone, of course, in its fight against climate change. Small island nations like Mauritius in the Indian Ocean, with a population of less than 1.3 million, are highly vulnerable to the devastating impacts of rising sea levels, flooding, and tropical cyclones. Ameenah Gurib-Fakim is the former president of Mauritius and a biodiversity scientist. She joins me now. President Gurib-Fakim, thank you so much for being with me. It's great to have you on the program. Mauritius, which is just off the eastern coast of Africa, accounts for only 0.01% of global greenhouse gas emissions. The entire African continent has produced less than 3% of carbon emissions, but it has been highly impacted by the global emissions of wealthy nations. Now, you've called it an existential threat to humanity. Mauritius is among the world's biodiversity hotspots. Just how urgent is the situation for a country like yours, and just how crucial is it to protect its ecosystems?
Thank you, first of all, Ghida, for having me. And it's very important to have this conversation. You have rightly said, climate change for us islanders is an existential threat. Why is this? Because, first of all, we occupy less than 2% of the world's, the planet's surface. But what people don't know or don't realize is that we have the web of life that is supporting the humanity. The existence of humanity as we know it. And so what people will say if islands disappear? And we support the ecosystem, and island countries with the ecosystem that we have, they actually provide over 40% of ecosystemic services to vulnerable people. More than this, the ecosystem provides us with medicine, with food, with just about everything we need. And of course, they also provide us with new solutions to future challenges that humanity will face. And unfortunately, when scientists talk about tipping point, they are talking precisely about the destruction of these ecosystems. And don't forget, small islands, they also have coral reef. And coral reef actually encompass 25% of marine biodiversity. So this is what we are faced up with, is that the destruction of the very web that is supporting life on Earth. And as I have said all the time, and I will say it again, we are, when I say we, because I still think that we're all living on the same one planet, we are destroying the branch that is keeping us all together.
You make a compelling case, both as a scientist and as a former head of state. I mean, are political leaders in the countries that matter listening? You've been involved in climate negotiations at the highest levels for many years. Are politicians taking it seriously enough? It always seems to be on the back burner until the next elections.
It has been on the back burner, as rightly said, until the next election. But I think, unfortunately, I will be very blunt here. It's only when the North is impacted that they're now taking this seriously. And I think recently we've heard this narrative coming out of President Biden in terms of climate emergency. You know, climate change has been affecting many countries in the global South, but nobody seemed to care. Now people care because we're seeing the impact in the global North.
Will leaders in the North and the global South take the steps needed? Because the next climate conference summit, which is just a few months away, risks being yet another PR event for world leaders, nothing more.
It's happening. People are waking up. But unfortunately, I think, I'm glad how to say this, the media is not playing its part, because it is not actually, primetime news when people actually walk against the damages of climate. So I think we all have to come together, hand in hand, the public. And there is a wake-up call in the global South as well. We have been shouting, we have been, clamoring for many years. But now that it's happening in the North, so we are hopeful that things will now be taken seriously.
Does it matter, though, how much you and other low-emitting countries in the global South do? Because I know that Mauritius is one of 29 African countries that have committed to curbing their emissions by 40% by 2030. But will it matter very much if wealthy countries responsible for most of the damage don't do their share, if there isn't this more equitable burden sharing?
We've contributed, you have given the figure 0.01%. And we know that Africa has contributed less than 3%. I mean, 3%, I think what the wake-up call is for the global North is that they have to reduce emission. I mean, there is no two way about it. You have to reduce emission. Just want to remember also some facts and figures. Any gram of carbon emitted now as we speak will stay in the atmosphere for 20,000 years.
But even if they acted now and cut their emissions drastically, many scientists are saying that it may be too late. Now, we often talk as well about climate finance. and how wealthy developed nations need to live up to their broken commitments to help poorer developing nations adapt to the climate emergency that they created. How important is climate finance, or is that the wrong approach? Should African nations focus more on breaking their energy dependency on wealthy nations in the north to develop their own localized mechanisms, to make their own transition to green energy?
Yes, there has to be climate finance because we have to close the gap, because we already know that there is a gap of about 26 billion US dollars from the 100 billion which have been pledged since Paris. And of course, people haven't actually responded and of course topped up the green fund. That's one area, because it will also help us access technology with the appropriate funding. But I think you have rightly said, Africa now has to move away from this dependence, and Africa has all the resources. And Africa can, now we're already seeing it with the Ukraine crisis in terms of food security, Africa has all the resources to take. And also we mustn't forget that as I've so spoken about the resources, Africa has the resources, but I think we can do without the interference from outside, and let us get on with our own business.
Getting on with our business, what is the most realistic approach? Because you and I have had conversations over the last couple of years. You've always said that what we need isn't revolutionary change. We need realistic change. What does it look like? And do we really have the time to change things around?
Well, we again have to be realistic. It is not going to happen because the resources of Africa are highly sought after. If you look at a country like DRC, which is running the mobile industry, how much do they get in terms of payment? I mean, these are all the realities we have to face up to. So it's all very nice to have this conversation about corruption and all the rest of it. But for every corruptee, there's a corrupter. And we can do with the taxes, we can do with people who are exploiting the resources of the continent, pay the dues. And I think this is only the time that we will be able to make headway, is that when we have the whole system of governance looked into, but of course with input from the global north, where most of the resources are going to.
Are you hopeful looking ahead towards COP27 and what comes after?
COP27, I think, is going to be, unfortunately, yet another meeting where pledges are made. But I think things will happen on the ground, because I think people will be demanding change. We are seeing a lot of unrest in many countries. We've seen how bad governance leads the country to. We've seen the example of Sri Lanka. So we don't want that. So the youth will be awakening, because don't forget that the fastest growing continent in terms of manpower generation for the young people will be Africa. So they are very much awake, and I'm seeing now a much more awakened youth in Africa, and they're very, very concerned about the state of the continent, and I'm sure they will be taking things in their hands.
And the clock is ticking. Ameenah Gurib-Fakim, former president of Mauritius, such a pleasure to see you again. Thank you for talking to me.
Thank you so much, Ghida. It's a pleasure talking to you as always.